having me here. I'm here under very onerous circumstances, as it happens. My father is not well, and I was summoned from the United States to be here in the event that he actually might not make it, and he is still around. So if this talk is a little more somber than it might otherwise be, you'll understand why. So I'm going to talk to you today about this particular approach that some of us at the Kennedy School, but increasingly through a broader global movement called Doing Development Differently, that has evolved to, over the last year or more, to really try and challenge programmatically how we engage with a particular set of problems in development, which we think are actually quite ubiquitous, but which have been a binding constraint on moving a lot of other issues forward over the last, well, forever, essentially. What we are proposing here is not necessarily new, and I will open shortly with a discussion of just showing you that a lot of these, both the sentiment, the theory, and the practice of this have been articulated quite forcefully and quite eloquently over many decades. So we're not claiming any sort of grand intellectual breakthrough with this. What we are trying to do is to build a social movement that turns something that has been articulated but in relative obscurity into something that actually becomes much more mainstream as a way of thinking about and responding to these particular challenges. And that's really what I want to talk to you today about, both the content of this and just the bracketed part on there upstairs and the limits of this. We're very conscious that too many people in development run around the world making big, bold proclamations about if only we did this, then the world would be a much happier place. We can make that kind of talk too if we want, but part of being honest and part of being credible in this space is recognizing that there are a lot of limits really to what one can ever do on these particular kinds of problems. And we want to try and be conscious of that, but also have a way of getting around it. The short version of what I'm going to be saying, and everything for the next 45 minutes will be the long version, the short version is really to argue that we as a development profession need to focus much more intently than we do on questions of implementation, and particularly on figuring out the capability of the prevailing systems in place for implementing to do what they want to do. So much of our discussion in development concludes, whether it's in a research paper or in a policy note with some sort of 2 or 3 page concluding section called policy implications. We've all read or written these kinds of papers. They include some sort of laundry list about how we should do more of this or we should do less of that, right? Which is fine, but a large part of what we're trying to focus on is whether anybody can actually do anything. Well, can the systems that are in place for building roads, paving the potholes in the roads, educating kids, immunizing babies, collecting taxes, prosecuting bad guys, those are all pretty fundamental tasks of governments everywhere. And those of us that are fortunate enough to live in rich countries often have a very blinkered history of how long and how painful it was to get an effective system of education for all, or healthcare for all in place. And indeed, many countries, including the United States, are still wrestling with those very deep political questions of how you actually solve those problems. Problems for which there isn't a technical solution. There isn't just an app you can upload, there isn't a pill you can take, there isn't a short solution to these problems. There are pretty much only political solutions, or the solutions you negotiate and navigate. And that's really what this is about, how we engage with those kinds of questions. There are problems in the world that engineers can and should solve. There are diseases in the world that smart doctors and immunologists will eventually figure out a solution to, and when they do, we will give them a Nobel Prize and congratulate them, and that's wonderful. But we've been wrestling since Plato and Aristotle with these questions of how we govern we, how we govern or interact with them, however those fault lines are determined. And there has never been, and we hope never will be, a solution to those kinds of problems. But very explicitly, I think, as part of the definition of development, there is part of that definition is that we are building modern systems of public administration, modern systems of economic and social and political accountability. And humans have wrestled long and hard, and often very contentiously, with those questions, and there isn't an answer to them. But so much of what we now will find ourselves doing in the 21st century, or the challenges we will encounter in the 21st century, are problems for which those are the binding constraints. And I'll go through the details of it. So that's what you came to hear. You can leave. We're done. That's the pitch. What anything else in details? So we're just going to go through sort of a four-part act here, four acts. I'm going to start off talking about what we call a development dilemma. The fact that, in one sense, we live in a time in history when things have never been better on average. Right? If you had to be if you could choose in a Doctor Who sense which time in history you would want to live in, probably you would choose to live now, especially if you have young kids with medical problems. You would absolutely choose to live now. And since our kids are probably the most precious thing to us, we take as the package deal a lot of the other unhappy things that are associated with modern life, because so many of the other key things that we turn on, whether it's our cell phones or our iPhones and the internet and all the rest of it, all of these are sort of a package deal. And a large part of what we have to do in the next part of the development quest in the 21st century is figure out how to move into the space of building up the capability of systems that will be able to deliver on those challenges, and how we manage the challenge from a world in which we've achieved enormous things and yet haven't seen commensurate improvements in the quality of institutions. So that's a big dilemma, I would say. How has the world got so much better, and yet why have our institutions not got so much better? Right? How is that even possible, logically, for that to have happened? And we've got to explain that and then have a way around that. I'll then sort of provide a basic framework for thinking about particular kinds of development challenges that we confront. Try and analytically distinguish these more technical problems from others that inherently require more negotiated and adaptive solutions. Give a sense of how some of this is playing out at the moment within the World Bank and within this broader global social movement that we're trying to build around these questions, and then give you some of the sort of more programmatic details around what we are calling for the moment this PDIA, problem-driven iterative adaptation. What are some of the characteristics of that, and how is it similar to, but ultimately different from, the way in which mainstream development activities are still conducted, but how this is different from the basic logic even of how development was set up in the mid-20th century. So a large part of what we think this social movement is really trying to do now is to bring 21st century sensibilities and 21st century technologies to bear on 21st century manifestations of ancient problems. Right, that's a long word. Okay, so here's some nice pontification to start with, to show you that we're very conscious that we're standing on the shoulders of lots of people who've thought about this before, and to give you some master metaphors to think about this stuff. And I think the details, especially if you're not a social scientist, or you think a lot of what we do is kind of poetry or something compared to the wet lab code work that real scientists do, let me sort of give you a sense of how we might think about what we're in the business of doing here. Albert Hirschman probably should have got a Nobel Prize in economics, but was a quirky character who won't, the details I won't get into. He wrote a series of canonical books for those of us at the nexus of scholarship and practice and development. And one of his many good books was this book called Journeys Towards Progress, a long lament about development in Latin America. And he says here, the term implementation understates the complexity of the task of carrying out projects that are affected by a high degree of initial ignorance and uncertainty. Here, project implementation may often be, in fact, a long voyage of discovery in the most varied of domains, from technology to politics. So the master metaphor I want us to think about here is this long voyage of discovery. Right? And I've said that the long voyage of politics goes back to Aristotle and Plato, goes way back to campfire discussions on the savannas 200,000 plus years ago, right? How do we deal with ourselves? How do we discern who our leadership is? How do we hold them accountable? How do we determine who they are? How do we deal with these crazy people that live across the ravine or live in a different country and speak a different language and have a different religion to us? Those are ancient problems that humans have always struggled with. And the way to engage with those kind of struggles, I think, is to embark on a collective long voyage of discovery and see it as that, an ongoing voyage of discovery. So that's from the 1960s. We go back even to the the colonial era, before the advent of the post-World War era, around how change was being thought about. One of my favorite all-time observations comes from Ki Dewantara, an Indonesian educator in the 1930s, and one of the most eloquent statements I think I've ever written about development. It's a long extended lament on what he's observing in the mid-1930s about his own country. Slowly but surely we have become alienated from our own people and our own environment. This alienation would have been bearable had it not been that in our case the abandonment of our own culture did not at the same time bring access to another civilization. Thus we have sacrificed what was ours, but have not gained in its place anything that might be considered its equivalent. In effect, we have lost our world, but we have not entered another. And I think that's what we see in so many developing countries now. People that have lost an internally coherent way of making sense of the world and haven't yet arrived in anything that would be a replacement for that, but are in this interstitial space between here and there, between entering and leaving. Between leaving and entering, as I say, that means that there is a deep unrest and a deep uncertainty that development itself, almost by succeeding, has created, even when it succeeds. We've added much new cultural material, the value of which cannot be discounted. However, it often fits so ill with our own style, or is so far removed from it, that we can use it at best as a decoration. I'll come back to that in a second. This whole idea of building stuff but using it as decoration, as almost pretending that we're something that we're not. We've best used it and not as material to build with. It is quite understandable why we have been so mistaken. In the first place, much had to be chosen, but there has been so little to choose from. Right? So this idea of a long voyage of discovery, of leaving one world and not yet entering another. A world of being given things notionally to build with, but that fit so ill with our own style that they're at best useful for decoration. Right? Very powerful and deep reflections on this business of development, right? Where we're giving people stuff. We're giving people schools, we're giving people health clinics, we're giving people roads, we're immunizing their babies, we're doing all these nice things that maybe just resonate awkwardly with their own style, and that at best end up just being able to be used as decoration. Looks cute, looks nice. We can decorate our world with these things, but it isn't us. We haven't owned it, it's not ours, it lacks the legitimacy that would give it our own ownership, right? So this is, 80 years ago now. People were worrying about these things, and we've either been ignorant of that, or we've just chosen to ignore it in the quest of mid-20th century sensibilities about how history itself was unfolding, and what needed to be done to accelerate some of those historical processes, or now in the 21st century where we find ourselves armed with a whole array of new technologies that we imagine can do history in a hurry, as one of my colleagues said. Compress something that in the rest of the world took hundreds of years into a log frame, into a 5-year plan, into an electoral cycle, around which we can construct a whole elaborate social scientific measurement apparatus in order to be able to then make claims about, yes, it is working, no, it isn't. To go back to the suits in Canberra then to appeal for more money so that we can go through this whole ritual all over again. Right? But if we're in Dewantara's land, right, where the very act of educating kids is changing that world. Right? So we give you an example from Vanuatu, where I was a few years ago. At a wonderful village meeting, as you do in many of these countries. And at the end of the meeting, a dear old man came up to me and said, it's great that all our daughters are now going to school. So when I was growing up, none of us even went to school. None of the men went to school. Now we live in a world in which the daughters are going to school. It's great. My daughter can read and write. It's fantastic. But she says, she thinks I'm an idiot. I can't read and write, so she thinks I'm a fool. And all the village elders are all men, and she thinks all of us are fools, but none of us can read and write. And so she doesn't respect any of the decisions that we make, any of the bylaws that we pass about how we become a steward of the resources, how we decide whether fishing land gets, lakes and fishes get used or not. So it's kind of getting really chaotic because nobody respects us anymore. Our own kids don't even respect us anymore. And more likely, actually, the fact that she's on education means that she's now going to want to leave us and go off to the capital city and maybe work in a hotel or work as a barista in a coffee shop, and I'll have lost her forever. So the very act of succeeding in development, right? She's educated, tick. She's empowered, tick. right? All the wonderful things that we have in all of our slogans that justify and reinforce what we think development is putting them on this path to netherworld. Of leaving one world, not yet entering another, and then being stuck in this space from which a lot of awful things can happen. And I think that's is the real dilemma of development, is that we can succeed. This is not stories of corruption, this is not failure, this is not all the horrible stories we sometimes read about money being siphoned off into the French Riviera houses of the elites of countries, and there's plenty of that, right? This is success. This is doing exactly what we said we were going to do, right? And what everyone in this room would want to have happen, right? Have girls be educated. And what is it doing? It's eroding. It's undermining something. It's delegitimizing a particular coherent political space, but not replacing it with anything else. And so what do? We construct it as decoration. We make it look like we're okay with all of this, and we write reports to you guys to make this all look like we're happy with all of this, but maybe there's some quite deep destabilizing processes at work here that we need to take much more seriously than we often do. And I would never claim to be an expert on Aboriginal affairs issues in Australia, but I think in microcosm, or maybe even on steroids, we've got that same kind of challenge going on all the time, this forcing of entering and leaving, but stuck in this netherworld, between here and there, from which, in which a lot of really strange and sometimes tragic things happen. Okay, so that's our big picture. The happier story in development is that we live in the best time ever for human history. So, over the course of the lifetime of pretty much everybody in this room, life has been unambiguously improving. Spectacularly so in the cases of countries like Vietnam, where life expectancies have doubled, where immunization rates have quadrupled, where all of the basic metrics we would have of human welfare have improved unambiguously over the course of that, certainly the last 50 years. If we even go to a continent like Africa, which is often inaccurately portrayed as a basket case in development, again, there, life incomparably better off in terms of basic human welfare indicators than it has ever been. Which is to say, development succeeded. Development in a narrow sense. Development by the key metrics that we use in World Development Reports, in UN Human Development Reports, all of the big metrics of how long people are living, how many years of education kids are getting, all these big aggregate metrics that we use, all trending happily upward. Right? Great. That's good. The paradox is that when we look in a different space at the quality of institutions around the world, the quality of political systems, the quality of electoral systems, and the public administrative systems, I'll go into this in more detail shortly, a much less happy story is told. Right? And so we've got an apparent paradox here, or a dilemma. Well, how is it possible that the world is getting much better in a measured outcome human development sense, and yet the quality of institutions delivering all of this stuff are improving at a glacial pace, or in many countries actually flatlining or getting worse? Right? So how do we explain that? Well, I think one way we explain that is sort of relatively basic mathematics, in the sense that going from nothing to something is by definition an infinite improvement. Right? So when you had kids with 0 levels of education and you give them 1 year of education, that's a huge infinite improvement over what they had before. So depending on what the baseline is, and the baseline back in the 1960s for most people in the world was incredibly low, as we'll see shortly, it was incredibly low even for rich countries like Australia and France. A lot of these improvements are improvements from an incredibly low baseline, and secondly, improvements that were achievable largely through logistical responses. Right? So if you had no school, and now you have a school, and the provision of the school is essentially engineering and accounting, right? Now you have a school, and previously, almost by definition, kids couldn't get a year of school because there was no building to go to. Now there is a building. Now they're getting something that we can tote up in our Excel spreadsheets as X numbers of years of education. Right? And you roll the same story out with something like immunizations. Immunizations are a classic logistics problem. Right? The biology is well understood. The biochemistry is well understood. You can get nice books that have been written about this as well. A country like India with 100,000 faithful functionaries, you can fan out across the country, see baby, insert needle, withdraw, repeat. Right? You can raise average life expectancies by 10 years just by doing that. Right? So I think one of the reasons that we've seen so many of these big improvements is the baseline was so low, and secondly, that we've been able to respond to that with some combination of engineering and logistics. Right? And we shouldn't be promoting that. That's a non-trivial and actually a really important achievement. That most kids get immunised, that most kids can attend something called a school building somewhere in the world. Even in the most far-flung provinces of Indonesia, I was just in rural Aceh a couple of months ago, even in the most obscure place there is still a building called a school there. Now, as we'll see shortly, the big challenge is turning what is happening inside this building called a school into something way more complicated called learning. And that's a whole different problem, I'll argue. It's not logistics, and it's not accounting, it's not engineering. It's a different kind of problem. But we can get lots of improvements in the world by doing logistics and engineering and accounting. We can pave roads, and that will make the world a better place. We have. And under pressure, political pressure under certain governments in Canberra, that's kind of what we revert to in development when we don't want to tackle the hard stuff. We build stuff. Right? So we pave roads, we pave paradise and put up parking lots. We do that kind of stuff because we know how to do that. We can outsource it to a nice consulting company like my brother works for. They can run off to a country, parachute in, do their thing, leave and celebrate, and for the most part, unless there's some obvious shenanigans going on, claim legitimate success. And it is a real success when you pave the road and when you put up the school and you've built a nice little health clinic. So it wasn't there before, now it is. Right? So a lot of that is, I think, the story of the late 20th century and maybe the first part of this century. Doing relatively easy, still complicated in its own way, but politically, most of the time, what people want to happen. Everyone in this room wants their kids to be educated, and as it turns out, most poor people want their kids to get educated too. There's not a big existential political fight to get kids educated. There might be an existential fight over gender equity, but that's a next generation problem. The basic question, do you want your kid to get a minimal level of education? Everyone in the world says yes to that. Okay? So we've done those kind of challenges. That's the third part of why this is stepped up. We've done logistics, we've done stuff from a low base, and we've done stuff that pretty much everybody wants to have happen anyway. Right? Would want to, and maybe there's been some political campaigning to make that sort of stuff be seen as desirable, but for the most part, most parents don't want their babies to die. They would like to have some health clinics and services available through them, no matter what circumstances they live in, and by revealed preference, that's what they would like to see happen. But, as I was saying using my example from Vanuatu, the fact that we've succeeded in paving their roads, the fact that we've succeeded in putting up cell phone towers so they can all surf the web on their i6 cell phone, the fact that we've put up education systems and funded gender empowerment programs so that girls can go to school too, all those are good things. And now, the big ones, the hard ones, the really hard ones await. Problems that can't be addressed through logistics, ones that can't be addressed through accounting, ones that only partially can be reduced to standardizable, off-the-shelf kind of reform. So, just a quick summary. Most people don't know, for example, that the average Bangladeshi today, for example, receives more years of schooling than the average French person did in 1960. Right? So that's an unbelievable change over the course of the lifetime of most people in this room, assuming you were born in 60s, 70s-ish, right? That's unbelievable that we've turned Bangladesh kids into getting the same years of education, crucial point, as French people did in the late 60s. What's the difference? Quality, not quantity. Right? The big question is how we turn the quantity into the quality. Most kids in South Asian schools are going to schools that are awful. Right? And my good friend and colleague Len Pritchard has a wonderful book that came out a year or so ago documenting just how tragic is the state of primary education in countries like India. The problem isn't the buildings, the problem isn't the absence of trained teachers, the problem is people not doing their job. People are effectively stealing from the state by not showing up to work every day. In a country like Bangladesh, on any given day, 40% of teachers are only there. 60% are not even showing up at all. Right? Is there building a nicer, prettier school, printing glossier textbooks in a local language even doesn't solve that problem. Right? How do we reimagine the whole social compact to get to that sort of challenge? That we don't know. Right? So a whole bunch of things. Relatively poverty lines. When I was growing up, and for many of you in this room, it was not uncommon to see, even in Australia, people walking around who have suffered polio as kids, right? Never see that now, right? Because we succeeded, because it was a disease beautifully solvable by biochemistry and logistics, right? It was solvable, and hallelujah that it was solved, right? But most of the other problems we're facing are not versions of polio. We want them to be versions of polio, because if they were, we could solve them. But most of the problems are these problems of Dewan power, right? You're taking me out of one world and you haven't yet put me into another. You're giving me stuff to make a new world with, but it doesn't fit with my own style. You're not allowing me to navigate, you're just giving me stuff, and it bounces out, right? That's the problems we've got to figure out how to get to. Life expectancy doubled over, there's a whole bunch of these sort of factoid statistics that are pretty clear about why we've got this world. I'm not going to do that. So the world is getting unbelievably richer, and it's also getting incredibly much more divergent as well. As Lance Pritchard called it several years ago, this divergence big time. Right? So we're all pretty much relatively the same as countries up until the 20th century, and then since the mid-20th century onwards, since this development era emerged, since this whole rapid rise of the narrow sense of human development indicators has improved, there's just ever-widening gap. And this, again, basic mathematics that underpin that. If you're a rich country like Switzerland and you grow at 3% a year, right? Or if you grow at 2.5% even for a generation, for 25 years, you double your income. So if you're at an average of 30,000, come back in 25 years, you're at 60, right? And if you were at 1,000 and you grow at 2.5%, you're at 2,000. So now it was a 1,000, 3,000 gap. You've grown at exactly the same rate. One's at 2,000 and one's at 60, right? So again, mathematically, we can have similar levels of growth occurring around the world that are just producing geopolitically and in terms of human welfare, just wildly divergent worlds in which people live. And some version of that is what Thomas Piketty and other people have been trying to demonstrate in rich countries as well. That's a separate story. Now, let's look at more in greater detail at these questions of institutions. Now, I won't go into details. There's a whole bunch of different metrics that are around the world, different data sets that people use to try and put the basic empirical handle on what the state of different economic, legal, administrative, political systems and institutions are in different countries. We're using here, kind of in an illustrative sense as much as anything else, quality of government data, which is collected by a group based around Bo Rothstein in Sweden. Point of this basic chart is just to look at growth rate, the quality of institutions as they were in 1998, and then look over a 10-year span and what happened to those institutions over that time period. The green countries up here are the ones that started off well and sort of improved along the way. Most countries are in this amber yellow area, which means they basically didn't change at all. And then all the red countries are ones that actually declined over that particular period of time. And if you do, again, the basic mathematics on that, 68 of the 98, more than 2/3 of countries in the world were flatlining or declining in terms of the quality of their institutions according to this data set. Now, we've done this with an array of different other data sets as well, and broadly speaking, that kind of story holds. That's using big country-level data, often derived from expert surveys where we ask a bunch of business leaders, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that the contract you've just signed will be upheld by the government over the next 5 years, and 3, 5. So there's different ways in which all these are put together. What I want to do now is shift gears from these big, broad, comparative data sets into more illustrative case study evidence from different forms of social science that tell a complementary story to all of this, but just show how difficult it really is to do some of this kind of work. The point of that slide is basically to show, despite all these wonderful improvements in basic human welfare, not much of it has been driven by the quality of institutions, because empirically they're flatlining or declining, except in the handful of countries where you would expect them to be doing quite well. Taiwan, Singapore, right? Those are the countries where you would kind of expect, on your own just experience of showing up in the country, that that's what would be going on. Let's look at a few other, we'll play a bit more with some of this data on a country-by-country level over time. So, we can look at a country like Haiti. Haiti's a really, really tragic and awful modern history, but it's interesting for empirical purposes because it's been technically a decolonial country for 200 years. It became its own independent country 200 years ago, so at face value at least, you think, well, they've had 200 years to get their act together, right? They can't claim that they were colonized in the last 50 years, they've been colonized for 200 years. So you would think maybe that would give them time to do stuff in a much more constructive way. And let's, for the sake of argument, assume that at independence 200 years ago, they were at the lowest ever seen level of capability, which is Somalia now. Right, so run that back out 200 years back that way, and say, let's assume, for the sake of back of the envelope calculations, that Somalia now is what Haiti was 200 years ago. Run that all out. It will take until we're in the Brisbane River that way to be at the level of Singapore. Right? Now, this is hundreds of years before that level of capability will be achieved. Even to get to a level, to get Haiti to a level of India, right? That's going to be out here somewhere in the year 400. And that's assuming that it actually goes at the pace it's gone over the last 200 years. If we do the BAU, the business as usual, over the last 10 years, which has actually been negative, by definition they'll never get there because they're getting worse. Right? So, very unhappy stories in modern history for the current trajectories that are really important and morally important countries like Haiti that are only seemingly getting worse and not better. Right? So even if they were to go at the average of all developing countries, or at the fastest possible pace ever seen in history, the fastest 20%, even there we've been able to show it takes 40 years to get a 1 standard deviation improvement in something like the quality of the legal system. Right? It's 2 professional careers worth of work to get a 1 measured standard deviation improvement in the justice systems in countries. Right? So the time frames we're talking about here, empirically, as in by what history reveals itself to us to show, at this crude sort of level, is just time frames that are just vastly beyond your average development project, which exists for that sort of length of time. Right? So we set up a governance project, or a good governance project, or a transparency initiative, or whatever we want to call it. We'll make all these Herculean assumptions about how wonderful it's all going to be over the time frame of our 3 or 5 year project. Often basing those assumptions largely on what evidence we might be able to cobble together or cherry pick from elsewhere to tell a happy story, when in fact most of the stories empirically need to be much more modest with regards to what's actually likely to be achieved, because by revealed capability levels, those levels are very modest. Let's switch gears a bit. Anthropology, not just sort of comparative economics. Actually, we'll do some experimental economics first. This is a test that was done by some Harvard colleagues of the most basic tasks that governments do. It's called delivering the mail. Right? Why is it the most basic? Because it's entirely logistical, right? And ultimately very reducible to a bureaucratic logic, and nobody doesn't want their mail delivered. Right? Everybody's very happy and wants it to be incredibly boring. They show up every day in their mailbox, oh, the mail's there, take it out, quick. Don't even think about it. That's been so routinized into our everyday life that we don't even think about it anymore. Of course, you will not be surprised to know there's a wonderful history about the history of post offices, and of course it was deeply contentious how we got the US Postal Service, for example. Dan Carpenter at Harvard's written a wonderful book on how that all took place. I'm going to use here an example of a very simple test that was done by some Harvard colleagues who tested out how capable is your postal service. Right? This is not how good is your customs and quarantine system. Right? We've all freaked out when we've gone through customs and quarantine in Sydney or elsewhere. There's sniffer dogs running around. That's actually really hard. It's the only country in the world I know, really, that actually takes that seriously. But we're a high capability country. We can do that kind of stuff. Right? But can we deliver the mail? Yeah, we can deliver the mail. But how well can other countries deliver the mail? Well, it turns out that 156 countries in the world are signatories to something called the International Postal Agreement, which simply says if you receive an envelope with a non-readable or just gobbledygook address that doesn't exist in this country, you are signing up to say, I will return it back to the sender from whence it came. Right? So there's 156 countries that are signatories to this. So my Harvard colleagues sent out 1,560 letters, 10 to each of those 156 countries, set their stopwatches. How long is it going to take for these countries to return gobbledygook address letters? Right? And if you're from if you're a Czech Republic person, you win the prize for the most capable post office. And even some other countries that you might expect to be in those categories, but the lowest 25, which is the countries where nothing was returned, even includes countries that you think would actually have a pretty decent postal service, like Nigeria, like Egypt, like Russia. Okay? Now, all of this evidence is what I'm calling illustrative evidence. It's not QED kind of stuff. right? But it's illustrative in the sense that, okay, maybe if you're a government strapped for resources, sending off these goofy addresses, envelopes back to America isn't exactly a high priority, so yeah, there's all that kind of stuff, right? But I'm trying to paint a picture here around the most basic thing that governments do. Nobody doesn't want their mail delivered. It's all logistics. Machines can do 99% of what we do with our mail, right? It's what zip codes and barcodes and all the rest of those wonderful things that Amazon can do now. What's the UPS in America, the UPS logistics, the UPS slogan underneath all their little trucks? We heart logistics, right? We've nailed this, right? You buy something in California, by 16 and a half hours later, we can predict that it'll get to an address in Connecticut because we've nailed the entire wonders of how to make that logistics happen. And it's beauty. It's a wonder of the modern 21st century economy, right? Most governments in the world can't even return their own mail, right? So why are we loading them up with all these wonderful expectations about being able to regulate Fortune 500 companies with lawyers on $5,000 an hour when they can't do the mail? Anyway, we'll come to that. So, we've seen this big picture from these big data sets. We've seen experimental evidence. The other one is to this book. It's a bit fuzzy there, but a wonderful anthropological book by Applegupta called Red Tape, an anthropology of the Indian state. I love this book. I love this case because it's another really good example of what we development professionals are wrestling with, but don't seem to take seriously enough. This is a great book. Why? Because the first part of the book is the series of political and social movement dynamics that made it conceivable and then a reality that a social protection program would be implemented in India for women over the age of 50 with few children and not much land. Right? Incredibly progressive for a country as poor and as big as India to be able to get a political consensus after much argy-bargy, right? That it was a good idea and a desirable and noble idea to give women in their sunset years who didn't have children to support them, or a lot of children to support them, and who didn't have a lot of material assets to leverage, like land, that they could have some basic minimum income guaranteed in the Constitution to give them some dignity in their later lives, right? Everybody in this room, like me, assumes that is a wonderful progressive project. We all think this is fabulous, right? And it is a fabulous project. So the first quarter of the book is all the work done by the equivalent of sort of Harvard Kennedy School alumni or students, all the fine wordsmithing of the documents, all the backroom deals, all the arm twisting and vote buying that had to happen in order for the final fateful day to come when enough ayes trump the nays to be able to get this. Yes, it's been passed, it's been approved, it's been done. Hallelujah, fantastic, this is great, right? And it was, it's an unbelievable political accomplishment. If you're a lobbyist or if you see your role in life as agitating for women's rights, you would have been the first in line to cheer that group on as that success was achieved. It was an unbelievable success, right? But it's a classic policy response, right? In the sense that we've now got a policy in India that women over the age of 50 with less than 2 kids and less than an acre of land could and should receive a basic minimal income. The last 3/4 of the book says what happened when we tried to implement that. We loaded up this incredibly complicated task on the prevailing administrative infrastructure of the Indian state. What happened, right? Was this incredible accomplishment of succeeding in getting the politics and the legality and the financing of this stuff succeeded? Were we actually able to implement that? And here, the anthropology of a development project, which I think is a hugely underappreciated and something that should be done way more often, was actually, okay, let's follow this. What actually happened to this, right? Well, what happened? So the front now trickles down through the various different layers of the Indian administrative system, IAS officers whose job it is to implement this stuff. And so Gupta hangs out with these frontline people whose job it is now to implement this project. Okay, let's see what happens. So he rolls out to the villages, and what did I say those criteria were? This for women. We can kind of tell that. That was relatively unproblematic. Right, but it's for women over the age of 50. How old are you, ma'am? I'm 52. Well, of course you're 52, right? The project is targeted for women of 52. And then someone who doesn't like her, or has a beef to bear with her, yells at the back, she's lying, she's actually 46, right? And so now there's this whole sort of discrepancy. I'm saying, well, have you got any, can you prove that you're 52? I actually don't even know what 52 means. They told me to say I was 52. In my village, we don't even celebrate birthdays. Right? We don't even think of our age in terms of years. years as an arbitrary category that has been constructed by Western administrative systems to make possible the distribution of driver's licenses and all the rest of it. These women didn't even have any conception in their head of how old they were. All they knew is they told if they said they were 52, they would get money from the government. Right? So, and then when push came to shove, can you actually prove, even if you don't yourself believe that you are 52, do you have a piece of paper that sort of says when you were born? No, I don't. Right? And at least a third or more of people in the world, maybe 2/3 actually, of people in the world don't have any piece of documentation that tells you how old you are. And if I challenged any one of this people in this room how old you are, you'd prove it to me in 30 seconds by whipping out your driver's license and saying, see, the state has verified that I was born on the 8th of July, 1966, or something like that. Right? And we'd all believe that as a legitimate document. A whole other study has been done on the issuing of driver's licenses in India. It's a whole even funnier story. But this is a kind of tragic story because it should be all about logistics and it isn't. Right? So you're a win, yeah, you can tell that. How old are you? You are what I say you are, essentially. That's what it comes down to. Right? To use a baseball analogy, I love this little story, this little quip. Someone once asked a famous baseball umpire, so, sir, you've now had a 30-year career as a baseball umpire. How do you, at the margins, how do you tell the difference between a ball and a strike? And he goes, very profound answer. He says, until I call it, it ain't nothing. Right? So that's essentially what those IAS officers, how old are you, man? You are what I say you are. Until you, right? Until I call it, you ain't nothing. Right? So what happens at the margins? IAS officers will, the worst of them, will agree that you are 52 if we exchange money, sexual favors, all sorts of other food, all sorts of other shenanigans starts to go on. And it's unable to be verified on something that, for most, certainly for most people in rich countries, is the most boring, routinized fact about your life, an unproblematic fact about your life, because you know exactly how old you are. Anthropologically, we're kind of weird in that sense. Most people never thought about themselves as having an age, as measured in a Gregorian calendar way that says you are this long, you've been on the planet for this long. Right? So, what did I say? Gender, age, number of kids. How many kids have you had? I've had 3. Well, of course you've had 3. They told me to say that as well. Right? Can you prove that you have 3? Or when someone challenges you, when an enemy challenges them, no, she's lying, she's only had 1 kid actually. How many kids have you had? You can't prove that either. Right? So you can see where this is going. Right? As this descends into land administration, even more complicated. How much land have you got? Well, I've got 1 acre of land. Because someone told me that if I had 1 acre of land, 2 kids, and it was 50, they'd give me money. Right? All of this, that's one of the beauty of this book, right? All the Kennedy School stuff. Let's get the legislation passed. Let's be the smart people, the cool kids that get all the heavy political and politics and wordsmithing and all that stuff done. And then we'll leave it to the chumps to implement or assume that that sort of takes care of itself, largely once all the smart people have done all their work doing the politics in a capital city. The whole thing imploded, and it still can't be implemented. Not because of goodwill, not because of adequate money, not because it's not legal, not because people don't want it to happen. It can't happen because there's no administrative infrastructure to do the basic stuff, right? And it's semi-contentious in there about how old you are, semi-contentious how many kids you have, more contentious how much land you have, because that's in the realm of political economy, right? But in this space where we haven't even started getting into the prosecuting bad guys, standing up to mining companies, like some of the great work that you guys are here trying to figure out at the Sustainable Minerals Institute. There's a really existential task that governments take on and fail even in rich countries most of the time. Right? And yet we seem to be asking countries that can't deliver the mail, that really struggle even with noble, important, progressive social policies, like the Indian state in this case here, with doing these kind of things. So the big challenge is, how do we start to think much more about what the capability of the existing systems are, and how can we build up the capability of these systems so that age doesn't become controversial, so that how many kids you have doesn't become a wedge issue around which opportunistic or nefarious frontline workers can start to exploit you and make a miserable life even worse because of the absence of this basic kind of stuff. Right? So we get then into these much bigger questions. Right? Here, Susan B. Anthony, right? William Wilberforce, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. Right? These are existential challenges and changes that countries went through to give women the vote, to end slavery, to get rid of colonialism, to give civil rights to all, and to end apartheid. Right? How did that end? That ended up with a nice little log frame that someone toted up and sort of showed progress over time. right? How long was Nelson Mandela in jail? 27 years, right? Imagine doing his annual review at year 26. So Nelson, what have you got to show for it? What are your metrics of success after 27 miserable years on the island out in the middle? I'll come back in 28 years, he's won a Nobel Prize, he's the president of his country, apartheid's gone, right? So the change and the shape of these trajectories are really, really long, right? The Vindication of the Rights of Women was written when? 1790, right? That's still unrealized. Women still only earn 80 cents on the dollar for every woman. How long did it end in slavery? Slavery's still not over. Still child trafficking and other insidious forms of stuff going on in the world. And does that mean it's failed because it hasn't? Well, yeah, kind of. But it just means that these are tasks that are constantly unresolved. They're deeply, deeply contentious. Because not everybody wants gender equality. Not everybody wants everybody to be treated equally. Not everybody wants to be independent and ruled by their own people. Not everybody wants to give equal rights to all people. Right? And so those are the big latter-day challenges that even in Western history were revolutionary, literally revolutionary. They brought down governments. They led to major and violent and bloody conflicts. And development, understood in that way, kind of puts countries on that path. Right? Why? Back to Dilandhara, right? We take them out of one world, we don't put them into another. We just delegitimize one world, we don't put them in another. We create this vortex of nothingness, right? In which we require age, but we can't measure it. We ask you to have a certain number of kids so that we can progressively give you something. We can't measure that either, we can't implement it, right? And so we decorate. We construct an elaborate artifice around a lot of these things to make it look like it's real, but it actually isn't. The fancy term for that is isomorphism. So you create a system that looks great that actually can't be what it's supposed to be. And I'll give you, I hope, if my next slide is right, I'll come back to that later. This nice example from the Solomon Islands, right? So a lot of our work that we've been doing on justice reform with the World Bank in a place like Solomon Islands is premised on exactly this same kind of dynamic, right? So what happens? So, violence and bloody war breaks out in the Solomon Islands, partly as a result of development success. Why? Because a whole bunch of people are moving around, job opportunities are better in the capital city, so that's where they move, and the arrival of these new strangers suddenly overwhelms an existing population, and all sorts of awful things happen. So what does the international community do? Oh, the problem is the inadequate policing and justice system to respond to that, because the police were overwhelmed. So what do we need to do? We need to train more coppers, we need to build better jails, and we need to build fancier courthouses because they don't have them. We can do that. That's logistics, that's engineering, as I said before. Right? So you get this $200 million state-of-the-art courthouse built on the island of Malaita in the Solomon Islands, which you cannot poke a stick at in terms of anything that would bother a bureaucratic Canberra. Right? Not a dime corrupted for all intents and purposes. It's eco-friendly, locally sourced material, local labour, no, none of it imported, local guys did the job, local job creation, bucks tick, 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 right? All beautifully procured. As I said, zero carbon footprint is situated just so that it captures the sea breezes, so they don't have to have billowing stuff going out into the atmosphere or whatever. So everybody loved this thing. It spent $200 million on it without it raising one skerrick of a question about whether this was good. No idea. But what is it actually? It's classic decoration, right? It looks like an effective justice system because real countries have real courthouses with guys in wigs and black coats sitting out with hammers dispensing this thing called justice. And we can do that as development professionals because we know how to provide those things, and we can create this whole elaborate artifice that makes it look like a state. And this is the title of a paper we wrote last year, Looking Like a State. Here's what you do when you want to look like a high capability government without actually being one. Right? As it happens, just around the corner from that very building, there is a $180 million state-of-the-art jail, which last time we checked had 8 people inside it. But because Australia built it, it has to be in accordance with Geneva Conventions, and so there has to be 3 meals beautifully produced every day. There has to be a weight room inside there so that they can exercise. It's just a palace. It's beautiful. And I'm not for one second criticizing that. I've seen jails in developing countries which are literally hell on earth. So it's wonderful that we build these jails. But is that the actual problem that Solomon Islanders face? Because when you go around the third block from that same little space on the otherwise very obscure island of Honiara, in Malaita, sorry, about a 2-hour boat ride away from Honiara, you come to the local police constable with 800 files, count them, stacked up in the back of his office, waiting some form of just local mediation. It doesn't need a guy with a wig and a black robe in a courthouse. It's probably not going to end up with some awful prosecution and being sent to jail for 5 years and denying a family a livelihood, right? It's just a dispute over land. It's a dispute over inheritance claims. It's an equivalent of a bar fight. The everyday problems that most Solomon Islanders face most of the time, right, do not require all of this wonderful, elaborate system to be able to deal with them. So we don't respond actually to the problems that they have. They have the problems that we can fix. That's a big, important distinction. If we can keep building stuff like that all over the world, produce annual reports that look wonderful, that'll literally ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and we can bring in ministers to have their little moment of 15 minutes of fame and do all sorts of wonderful things. And that doesn't fundamentally change the system, but it makes it look like an effective system. Right? And we believe that, and we are content with that. What else do? We hold elections. Right? Real democracies have elections. And all the critics of a certain political stripe will be happy if we can pretend that something called electoral democracy has taken hold. And there's a whole bunch of companies in Washington that you can hire, and USAID does, to run off to Afghanistan or to anywhere else in the world and run you an election. Right? So what do? We treat it as a technical engineering problem. Right? Elections. We think, oh, it's a logistic. We've got to roll it, we sort of ballots, we've got to have a few campaigns, and something called an election transpires. It has to be free and fair, or some notional third party has to verify that. Now we have a democracy, and it flips from one category into another, and so it's eligible for a whole different stream of revenue from Washington or Canberra or anywhere else. Right? So what we've tried to do with our Justice for the Poor program is really to try and have a very different approach to this, all around what we call justice delivered locally, which is about trying to start with the problems that people actually face. And what are the challenges you confront, citizen, when you are trying to engage your legal system and uphold your rights? Get some basic justice around most of the problems you face most of the time. Now, all of that, I'm running out of time. This is fun. Good therapy for me to be doing something vaguely normal. What we've done with this kind of work, and what my other colleagues who work in health and education have done, is to recognize that this kind of problem is ubiquitous. It's kind of graphic in these examples I've shown here, or the examples of elections. Same sort of thing occurs with schooling, right? We have enormous amounts of energy spent on trying to figure out what's the optimal class size, for example. Right? We have rigorous randomized controls trials telling us that 27.2 is the ideal size for educated kids. Right? So we have scientific evidence on the basis of white lab coat standard clinical trials that show us this. And then we run around the world on the basis of that evidence in Mongolia or in Chad or in Uruguay, announcing that 27.2 is the right solution to this particular problem. Right? PDIA is about, as the first initials implies, is about saying problem-driven, and problem-driven from the side of people that are actually using or managing the existing system, not problems in terms of what we think is a problem. In this world, the problem is we, outsiders coming into the country, see the problem as the absence of a legal system, and so we respond to that problem by providing what we know how to do in the logistics and accounting and engineering space by providing a nice courthouse or a nice jail. We don't respond by doing the much messier anthropological task of actually going around to villages and actually finding out what their problems are, and given that there's a zillion of them, right, how do we prioritize those problems? On what basis do we say, well, you've got 25 things that are kind of messed up in your world right now, you can't fix all of them, how are we actually going to get some legitimacy for fixing the roads over fixing the health clinic over fixing the community center? Right? Now, we want to do this in 2 weeks in a nice mission where we're staying in fancy hotels and collecting our honorariums and doing all sorts of nice things. Right? You can take months to get a process going where you actually help get people into a space and into a political consensus around which we start to think about these kind of problems on the basis of what they themselves have nominated to be the problems that they face. And then the iteration and the adaptation part is back to where I started with Hirschman, this long voyage of discovery, saying it's for those kind of problems and those kinds of priorities, we don't know what the solution is. And hiring a bunch of smarter people with more money is probably only going to hinder rather than help the process of arriving at a solution, because we fundamentally can't know. Right? Well, what kind of reaction we have in Australia if a bunch of oil sheiks fully showed up and just started dispensing advice to us about how to run our legal system and our education system? We'd probably go, yeah, thanks, but it's been great, but we've got our own way of doing things, thank you very much. Right? It's kind of, we're like Arab sheiks to many of these people. We're weird people from a different cosmological universe in many cases. There are very weird understandings of what constitutes the problems and what constitutes the solutions. And the much messier political task is inverting that. Right? Embarking on the long voyage of discovery. Embarking with Herschel on this long, probably problem-fraught journey of trying to figure out what the problems are, as nominated by local people, and then over-iterating our way towards a solution. So the big master metaphor here, on which I will conclude, building institutions is the equivalent of learning a language, riding a bicycle, or playing a musical instrument. Right? You're awful at it when you start. Every parent knows this, everyone who's tried to kick a football knows this, everybody who's tried to play the oboe knows this. Right? You don't just, you have to walk before you can run. You have to be able to do some pretty easy stuff before you start doing the hard stuff. Right? But in our too many development professionals world, we start with the oboe and put you in front of a symphony orchestra and expect you to be able to be really, really good because we have proven that this will work. Right? Without going through this much messier process of figuring out how to actually get good at this. That's why sports are endlessly fascinating to me, because it's all about trying to get a team to figure out how to be really, really good at this. Right? And it takes forever, and you've got to keep doing it, because winning a premiership one year doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it again the next. New cast of characters come on, people retire, people get injured. The system has to reinvent itself and get equally good over time. That's why winning triple premierships like the Lions did a few years ago is absolutely amazing, because they had high capability for so long. Right? We live in a world in which we have high capability systems in which we are blissfully ignorant of how amazing they are. We have lighting in this room going on, we have PowerPoint shows, we have comfortable seats, we have rules requiring when we exit in case of fire. So it's all part of an amazing, elaborate, high capability system designed to minimize death, designed to maximize comfort, and hopefully to maximize some interaction and learning. Right? But that took forever to get that world. Even 20 years ago, we didn't have warnings about fire escapes. So this is all what, at the leading edge of high capability systems, we learn how to do. But as I said, we can't even deliver mail in most countries. We can't even do the things that people want to do, like education and health, let alone take on these much more vexing questions that the Gandhis and the Mandelas of the world took on, which is to fundamentally change a very entrenched and deeply powerful political system. And all the successes we're now achieving in development, about educating kids, about paving roads, about putting up cell phone towers, getting immunization, all those things that have produced these spectacular gains over the last 50 years, now confront the really hard problems of getting beyond all of that to actually make these systems work at a much higher level. So this is a note on which I conclude my Kennedy School class. This is why it's fun to be alive. This is why it's great to be in development right now, because all these really, really messy and hard problems are exactly what social science should be existing to do. Right? It's not that the other stuff in engineering and those things aren't important. Of course they are. But the cutting edge of making these otherwise wonderful programs like the one I described in India work is that's not an engineering solution to that, not an accounting solution to that. Right? It's a political, social, compact solution to all that, which we don't know how to do. And we'll have to learn it the same way we learn an oboe, which is to be awful at it until we get better. Right? And so PDIA is ultimately, like, you can go into detail, you can actually, I'll fast forward in case just you, that's more stuff I didn't talk about. There's a very glorious sort of list of things. If you're a person that likes to read some of this stuff, that's all the details of what we do. But, or more briefly, just type in doing development differently into Google, and it'll bring up this whole long list of nearly 1,000 people now around the world that have signed on to this sort of manifesto, literally, that we've constructed for trying to help people think about development kind of in the way I've just described. It'll obviously be different in different countries, different sectors, levels of experience, but this is very much the different way we're trying to instantiate and move a development agenda forward. And I hope those of you who are in the business of development, or even tangentially on the side, just giving money to your favorite charity or to other causes that you care about, will start to maybe think about development in these kind of ways. Thanks very much.